I took too much and I was literally falling asleep in front of this chick on a sushi date. Like I was like literally sitting there nodding off. Like, you know, when you're trying to study really late at night and you have like a midterm the next day and you're just binging and trying to cram as much information into your head as possible, and it gets to the point where you're literally like passing out on your goddamn keyboard. That's what I was like sitting at sushi on this date. What's up guys, Derek, moreplaysmoredates.com. Today we're going to be talking about GHB. This is a, I don't know, like an infrequently requested but long-standing requested topic on the channel is my experience with recreational drugs. So I do not have very much. Like, I don't know why I just had no significant interest in experimenting with that kind of stuff. Even like very basic shit, a lot of it I have not really touched. Like I've never even smoked weed in my entire life. So for me, all the stuff of my attention was in relation to performance enhancement in some aspect, whether it be cognitive, whether it be physical, whatever it is, it was always centered around some sort of improvement in some endeavor rather than simply feeling good or, you know, whatever. So, you know, obviously I had experience with alcohol and knew that was like the most effective compound at removing social inhibitions. And when you were when you're a teenager and you're first getting into the, you know, dating world and you're trying to, you know, learn how to talk coherently with women and fluently and go on dates and whatnot, or I should say like pick them up at bars and shit like that, you're obviously not going to get fucking hammered on a date. But even before the date, meeting the women in the first place, a lot of guys need at least, you know, they literally will pre-drink and then get shit-faced at a bar or a club in order to muster up the ball sack to go talk to a chick. And that's obviously not ideal, not only because you don't realize how poor your actual like coordination is to the point that you look like a fucking buffoon thinking you're smooth, rather you're like stumbling around and look stupid. That's not ideal. But in addition to that, I was like very, very gung-ho about bodybuilding at the time, and using something that is, well, first of all, something super liver toxic, as well as something that is going to literally nuke the fuck out of your gains for like half a week at least. Like the amount of lag time you have between after you get hammered, like it pretty much ruins your entire day for like everything you ate. Pretty much everything goes to shit that day. Your recovery goes to shit, and then it takes however many days to recover and get back in the gym and get back to baseline. And if you're doing this like once a weekend, a lot of people were, or once every couple of weekends, it becomes pretty hard to fucking progress well, put it that way. So for me, this was something I wanted to avoid like the plague. I didn't want to ever have to drink to a point of intoxication that would inhibit my recovery and or progress in any aspect whatsoever, just in order to get that social inhibition component of it, which at the time, before I got like actually comfortable doing everything sober, you know, talking to random people and whatnot, it was, you know, a part of the going out, you know, routine slash, I don't know, it's like, you know, you get together with your boys, you pre-drink, like it's fun, you know, it's routine. So that kind of thing, I was like, what is a replacement? Like my first deep dive into pharmacology, really, actually it wasn't even a deep dive, I just barely knew what the fuck I was doing. And what I was looking at online was trying to find replacements for alcohol, things that would give you the same kind of social inhibition, the reductions in your inhibitions, where you have no social anxiety whatsoever, but without fucking up your actual coordination and your gains. So that led me into finding about things like phenibut, and it also led me into finding things like GHB, which at the time was purportedly like the godsend compound that was going to give you all of the benefits of alcohol with none of the downsides. I was like, oh shit, well that sounds pretty damn promising, so I'm gonna, you know, look into this. Eventually end up trying it, and damn if I do not remember very vividly that salty ass fucking taste. Because I definitely overdid it a few times, more than a few times. And you know, if you've ever like overdone it with alcohol and you have like, let's just say you puked one day having, I don't know, some flavor of Smirnoff or something, and then forever after that, that flavor is embedded in your mind as making you nauseous, and you like just cannot have that flavor of anything without it making you feel like shit. That's kind of the GHB thing for me. Like when I think of that salty fucking thing now, it's like, bro, it gives me fucking heebie-jeebies. So anyways, end up trying it, and I take it easy. I don't use too much. Fortunately, I was at least had the foresight to not overdo it off the bat, which a lot of people will think, oh, just like a fucking bottle cap, that's nothing. They end up overdoing it to the point that they're fucking passed out. That is a realistic occurrence. That happens a lot. And it depends a lot on the concentration of the GHB you're getting from whatever source you're getting it, because at the end of the day, you're probably not getting fucking pharma GHB, which would be the ideal source if you are going to be using it at all. It should be prescribed by a doctor. Medical disclaimer. I literally have a giant medical disclaimer at the start of the video. This is, but anyways, just in case, fucking YouTube reviewers, this is educational content, harm reduction, etc. This is about my experience and what I think of it in general. And obviously, you should not do anything without doctor supervision. So anyways, this compound in particular, did it give me the same social inhibition properties of alcohol? No, it did not. In fact, it was even worse for me than phenibut, which phenibut is like, I don't know, 1/5 to 1/10 of the social inhibition of alcohol, I guess, depending on the person. But again, maybe I'm not the best person to kind of make that statement, because I'm talking about my individual response. Like for me, I have an interesting response to some of these kind of like GABAergic type drugs. Even stuff like kratom. Like I respond very oddly to shit. I know that's like a totally separate compound entirely, but at the time it was another one of those compounds I was looking at the time for pro-productivity, pro-euphoria, pro-sociability, that kind of shit. And, I tried like a bunch of different stuff, and those were some of the main ones that had potential at the time. And you have to keep in mind, this is like fucking 19-year-old, 20-year-old Derek or something trying to figure out like what the fuck to do. So I didn't really know. I was just kind of experimenting with stuff. And the GHB thing, first time I took it, it's like, did I notice a difference? Yeah, I did. However, was it a good difference? Literally to me. Now, I know this is totally contradictory to what a lot of people's experiences were. And maybe I was just, the unfortunate individual who responds poorly, because at the end of the day, pharmacology does not give a fuck like about your, like your genetic response is going to vary individual to individual. Some guy could have a Tylenol, not get rid of his headache. The other guy needs an ibuprofen. You might need a Tylenol or an ibuprofen. Maybe one or the other doesn't work. And the other one that fucking doesn't work for you works great for another guy. Same thing with anabolics. Some people like D-bol, some people like Anadrol, some people don't respond well to one or the other. And the other guy vice versa. Same shit happens all the time. So it's not out of the ordinary that my experience is going to differ significantly from the next guy. But in general, for me, what happened, it was literally like all of the bad shit of alcohol minus the, none of the body composition negatives, none of the recovery negatives happened. So I guess I can't say all the negatives, but as far as like coordination or just the feeling of being just drunk, just feeling drunk, that feeling, you get it very easily with GHB at not a very high dose. However, the social inhibition component of it, much less pronounced in my opinion. Now, like you feel drunk, but you actually have better coordination, I found at least, than alcohol. And by the time you get to the point where you're starting to be like, G-holing out, you are going to be like falling asleep anyways, to the point where your coordination is not necessarily a result of the GHB making you a clumsy fucking buffoon. Rather, you are literally like passing out and it's causing you to, stumble and shit. Like that is the kind of thing you get on it. Like for me, the worst scenario for me, fortunately, was, actually there was a couple. I remember one time, fell asleep at a club. The guy with the bouncers, is funny because I ended up like meeting these bouncers down the line when I became a bouncer years later. But at the time, they thought I was like hammered as fuck. And then, when you wake a guy up on GHB, it's like weird how normal they seem. Like you're expecting the guy to be drunk out of his tree and, be stumbling out like a fucking mess. But instead, I was just like literally asleep. And I wake up, I'm like, oh, I fell asleep. Sorry about that. Just like perfectly fucking coherent. Could make fluid, like articulate sentences and whatnot. But one time I was out at, I don't even know what the fuck I was doing after, like why I took it. Because I was out on like a sushi date with some chick. And then I was like going to go out after, I think. And I took too much. And I was literally fucking falling asleep in front of this chick on a sushi date. Like I was like literally sitting there nodding off. Like, when you're trying to study really late at night and you have like a midterm the next day and you're just fucking binging and trying to cram as much information into your head as possible. And it gets to the point where you're literally like passing out on your goddamn keyboard. That's what I was like sitting at sushi on this date. Like I was a fucking mess and there was nothing I could do about it. It's, that's what happens when you take too much. And I've had experiences like peripherally of much worse occurrences with like when I was bouncing, sometimes we'd have guys on shift who would take GHB and I'm like, to make their shift more fun, I guess. And I remember one time, one guy on shift G-holed out and he was just like blacked out, and we had to like bring him in to sleep behind the coat check girls at the front of the club, and he's just like sitting there fucking KO'd for the rest of the night. And he's the bouncer who's supposed to be tossing out the fucked up people, and there he is, like fucking KO'd as fuck. So anyways, the extent of my bad experience basically came down to, you know, falling asleep at a few random places, or at least borderline to the point that it's like, you know, I needed to be like woken up essentially. Wasn't actually like blacked out, fortunately. I was like fairly careful about my titration of it, but I was like at the point where I got to using it maybe like 10 plus times. I'm like, okay, I've given this a fair enough shot, and it just it's not good, you know? I was like better off without it at that point, to be honest, because it was just making me drunk for like none of the benefits essentially. Like you could feel just like the haziness of drunkenness, but like maybe like 1/10 the social inhibition comparability. Maybe 2/10. I don't really know, but it wasn't pronounced enough to justify its use whatsoever. The only thing it really had going for it was the fact that it wouldn't fuck up your gains. And there was a lot of talk about its effects on GH secretions and whatnot, and how profound of an impact it can have on bodybuilding outcomes. And believe it or not, GHB was actually sold over the counter at GNC at one time, which is fucking wild, dude. Like all of the shit that's been sold at GNC over the years, Superdrol, M1Ts, GHB, fucking hella strictly scheduled shit at this point, was at one time sold over the counter to teenagers and stuff. Fucking wild. And it wasn't that long ago if you think about it. Like when you think about stuff that was sold over the counter with like cocaine in it and shit back in like the 50s and 60s or whatever it was, like that sort of makes sense. You know, they're selling DNP as fat burners, you know, fucking 100 years ago, or what is it, like 80 years ago or some shit. But having something in like the 90s, you know, like it's not that long ago, and they would have fucking GHB just over the counter. Like, here you go, buddy. And then Superdrol, like not that long after. So anyways, kind of a tangent, but for me, anyways, GHB sucked, was not worth it whatsoever. And it is probably not a drug you want to rely on, because at the end of the day, once you get to a point where you are relying on something, and this is where the educational, you know, component comes in, as far as like crutches for sociability, like I can see why it would be a desired outcome to, if you are completely incapable of talking to people without being under the influence of something, to then want to partake in heavy drinking and or, you know, GHB use and or whatever, fill in the blank compound. But these are crutches that eventually you may become. There's kind of two thoughts on this. One is that you wouldn't be able to expose yourself to this kind of like exposure therapy where you are killing your anxiety by literally taking a drug and also, you know, talking to the opposite sex or doing whatever you're doing with it. And on the opposite side, there's people that would say you're going to get dependent on it in order to get that outcome. So you're reinforcing bad behaviors by doing something that you're only capable of doing on this drug. Therefore, you're going to use the drug every single time. I don't know what the true answer to that question is, but for me, like when it comes to something that you may become like psychologically dependent on, that is like very, very hardcore and can kill you, you know, it's, now again, I'm not, you know, here to argue the risk averse, you know, how not risky it is. Like obviously fucking basic over-the-counter shit, insulin can kill you if you really, you know, I'm not going to get into that because obviously there's arguments about like how many people have actually died from insulin overdose and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, it's not a like safe drug, like especially something that is going to knock you out. Driving, you know, how many people have fucking fallen asleep on the wheel on GHB or alcohol for that matter? Like it's definitely not a safe compound, and it's ideally not something you want to depend on for social interaction. Ideally, I can tell you for certain, maybe it might be harder to throw yourself into the fire if you don't have this kind of shit. But at the end of the day, the exposure therapy through throwing yourself into the fire, even if you're sober, you're going to get to the same endpoint. So, and at the end of the day, you will not become psychologically dependent on a substance to get to that point because you're going to realize it's you doing it yourself. So, like as much as I've used like Phenibut in the past for like job interviews and shit like that, like now looking back on it, stuff like, you know, hardcore shit like GHB and whatnot, I would probably advise against very strongly for any purpose other than the indicated one, you know, for pharmaceutical deployment or whatever the fuck your doctor has deemed it appropriate for. So like for me, again, maybe I just had a bad experience, so I have a bad taste in my mouth, like fucking literally it tasted like shit. But in addition to that, just the effects were not that good for me. So it was not worth it. And some people seem to have great experiences with it to the point that they say it's far superior to alcohol and without any of the recovery problems that come with alcohol. So it's perfect for your gains and perfect for social settings. I don't really know because I haven't experienced it. So I can't really say for certain. But what I can say is personally, my anecdotal report is wasn't worth it. and it sort of reinforces negative behaviors if you're using it strictly for, you know, meeting women and or putting yourself in social situations that otherwise might scare you. Because at the end of the day, you're ultimately going to end up at the same level of social prowess through exposure therapy as a natty who doesn't have a bunch of psychologically mind-altering drugs in their system. It's just harder to get yourself into the fire to begin with. But I promise you, once you fucking get there, I've mentioned before, it's like double Dutch jump rope. It's like you're like fucking hesitant to jump in. It feels like you're gonna get slapped in the face. And frankly, you probably fucking will at least a handful of times when you first try. And when I say slap in the face, I don't literally mean a chick's gonna slap you in the face, but I mean, it's going to feel like a slap in the face when you get rejected and or, you know, stumble across your words, just introducing yourself and saying your name and shit like that. So yeah, you just gotta deal with it though. That's like part of the process of growing up and becoming an adult and learning how to socialize with other humans. So I would not advise GHB. In my experience, it was very poor. If you had a different experience, drop it down in the comments down below. I'd be interested to see. I haven't visited this topic in a fucking while. This was something I really, I remember not even really looking at the pharmacology. It's interesting because now the first thing I think when I see a drug, I'm like, let's go look up how it interacts with fill in the blank receptor and how it does this and what kind of contraindications it has and blah, blah, blah. Like back in the day, it was just like, oh, people said this was good, so like take it and like start low, but be careful. Like that's the kind of shit, that's the kind of like effort of like safety that went into my thought process at the time, which is wild when you see like where I'm at now. Way more meticulous I am about analyzing things, but that is why, you know, I make these kind of videos because everyone had their own experiences that, you know, bad choices and whatnot. And that is one of mine, one of my experimentation phases that was ultimately a failed experiment for sure. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplatesmoredates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplatesmoredates. Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. My TRT clinic, it's all telemedicine from the comfort of your own home. Gorilla Mind, nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode, pre-workout formulas. I design myself from scratch, and anything else I'm associated with, including my recommended lab tests and diagnostics to stay on top of your health. It's all in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.